Hey, Guardian, ever feel like trying to navigate, you know, whole galaxy of information out there?
Yeah.
Well, today's deep dive, we're tackling something that's going to equip you with, well, some pretty vital intel. We're diving into Space Capstone Publication 30,
Okay.
SCP-30 for short.
Right.
Think of it as like your guide to how the U.S. Space Force operates.
Yeah, a lot of folks, they hear military doctrine, they think, oh boy, sounds about as interesting as.
As exciting as watching paint dry.
Exactly right. But SCT-30, it's anything but. This document, it lays out how the Space Force is looking to keep its edge.
Its advantage, yeah.
Right, especially now when space is becoming, well, a lot more crowded and a lot more, shall we say, contested.
Yeah, forget about those Hollywood space battles with lasers and whatnot.
Yeah.
This is about understanding the real deal,
Right.
the actual challenges, the opportunities out there. And it goes back a lot further than you might think.
Oh, absolutely. Decades ago, you had these big names like General Curtis LeMay,
Yeah.
the guy who basically revolutionized air power. He saw space as like this natural
Right,
progression.
like the next step for the Air Force.
Exactly.
And then you've got General Bernard Shraver, who was really spearheading those early ballistic missile programs, which, I mean, that was laying the foundation for everything we're talking about today.
Yeah, and for a while, that was kind of the prevailing view space as this primarily strategic domain.
Okay.
Think intelligence gathering, early warning systems, really stuff to support those high-level decision makers. But then you have the Gulf War, which really changed everything.
All right, so let's break this down a bit. How did the Gulf War really shift how we think about space?
Well, you see, the Gulf War was like this massive proof of concept.
Okay.
It showed everyone that space-based assets, they weren't just, a nice little bonus. They were critical in a real-time fight.
Oh, for sure.
Suddenly you had GPS, you had satellite communications, real-time intel straight from orbit. These were essential for pretty much every part of military operations.
So we're not just talking about, like you said, high-level strategy anymore. We're talking about boots on the ground, ships at sea.
Exactly.
Everyone was relying on what space brought to the table.
It changed the game completely. But here's where things get really interesting. You see, while the U.S. was busy building up this, incredible space infrastructure, others were watching, paying close attention.
Oh, yeah.
They realized, hold on, this space stuff is important. So they started investing in their own programs, and not just to catch up, but to directly challenge the U.S. We're talking anti-satellite weapons, jamming technology, the whole shebang.
Wow. So space isn't this, like, peaceful realm anymore. It's become a contested domain with real competition, maybe even conflict.
That's exactly right. And grasping that shift, well, it's absolutely key to really getting what SCP-30 is all about. This document, it's the Space Force's response to a whole new reality where maintaining an advantage in space, well, it's not a guarantee anymore. It takes constant work, constant vigilance.
Yeah. It's not enough to just, have the most stuff up there. It's about how you use it, especially in this, much more challenging environment.
Exactly.
Like, we were so busy writing the rule book
Right.
that we didn't notice others were learning how to play the game, maybe even changing the rules a little.
Right, right.
So if this publication is all about adapting to that new reality, where do we even start? What's the core concept we need to really grasp?
It all boils down to space power. And I don't mean like spaceships and laser beams.
Right.
It's about really understanding how to achieve your goals through the control and use of space.
Okay, so it's not just about, having a presence in space. It's
Yeah.
about leveraging that presence to get things done.
Yeah, you got it. SCP-30, it actually defines it as the ability to accomplish national objectives in or through the space domain. It's all about integration, weaving those space capabilities into every single aspect of military operations. Think planning, think intelligence, command and control, even direct combat operations.
Wow. So how does SCP-30 actually lay out that framework? Like, how does it say the Space Force should go about achieving this?
Well, that's where those terms you've probably heard come into play. Cornerstone responsibilities, core competencies, and space power disciplines. Now, these aren't just some fancy jargon.
Yeah.
They're the foundation. They underpin everything a Guardian does.
Okay, let's try to break those down a bit. What exactly are these cornerstone responsibilities?
These are the big ones. They're the non-negotiables the Space Force owes to the nation, the pillars holding up everything else.
Okay, I'm with you.
So first, you've got generating space power. Basically, that means building and developing all the capabilities we need. Then there's presenting space power, making sure those forces are ready to go, whenever and wherever they're needed. And, of course, sustaining space power, keeping those capabilities up and running for the long haul.
So it's kind of like, if you think about it like building a house.
Right.
You build it, you make it look presentable, and then you got to do all the maintenance to keep it in top shape.
That's a great way to put it.
All at the same time, right?
Exactly.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But what about those core competencies? Where do those fit in?
This is where we get into the how of space power.
Okay.
These competencies, they represent the specialized stuff, the skills and knowledge that the Space Force brings to the table.
I'm listening.
First off, space domain awareness. Knowing what's happening up there and why it matters.
Right.
Then you've got space electronic warfare, jamming enemy communications, protecting our own, that kind of thing. And of course, space operations, which covers everything from launching satellites to actually maneuvering them in orbit and, yes, defending those assets in space if we have to. It's like having, a well-stocked toolbox. You've got your hammer, your screwdriver, your wrench. Each one has its own specific job to do. These core competencies, they're kind of like that, giving Guardians the right tools, the right skills to handle whatever comes up in space.
Okay, so we've got the foundation, the why, with the cornerstone responsibilities. We've got the tools, the how, with the core competencies. Where do those space-powered disciplines fit in? Those sound kind of, I don't know, almost philosophical.
You could say that. Think of them as like the guiding principles, the intellectual framework for how Guardians make sense of everything. They create this common language so everyone's on the same page when it comes to planning, executing, and changing up operations in space.
So it's like, okay, we've given you all the tools. Now here's the instruction manual on how to use them effectively no matter what situation you find yourself in.
Exactly. And here's where things get even more interesting. SCP-30, it doesn't try to pretend like space is this thing totally separate from everything else. It recognizes that space is completely woven into modern warfare. That's why it really stresses those joint operations.
Right, because at the end of the day, the Space Force, it doesn't operate in a bubble.
Nope.
It's all about working hand in hand with the other branches, the Army, Navy, Air Force, to get the mission done.
Exactly. And to do that right, SCP-30, it lines up what the Space Force does with these broader principles of joint operations, the same principles that guide, the entire U.S. military.
Okay.
You've got ideas like maneuver, economy of force, unity of command, restraint. These are all ideas that have been, taken and applied to the unique challenges you find in space.
Right, I could ask, how does some of these even work in space?
Yeah.
It's not like we're talking about tanks maneuvering on a battlefield. Right.
So let's start with maneuver. What does that even mean in the context of space?
Oh, that's a great question. And it shows how these ideas that seem very earthbound, they take on a whole new meaning when we start talking about space.
For sure.
Remember that Iranian missile attack a few years back?
Oh, yeah.
Back in January of 2020,
Yeah.
when Iran launched those ballistic missiles at U.S. bases in Iraq?
Right. I remember that. How does maneuver apply to something like that? Were we like dodging missiles in orbit?
Not quite. In that case, maneuver was all about the Space Force, shifting its assets to provide that early warning of the attack. Think of it like, moving your pawns on a chessboard to get a better view.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they didn't actually, physically move any spacecraft or anything, but they still maneuvered their resources to deliver that absolutely critical information at the most critical time.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And you know what? That gave our forces on the ground those crucial extra minutes, maybe even seconds, to take cover.
Which could mean the difference between life or death. See, in space, maneuver might mean repositioning satellites, changing up sensor coverage, even deciding which communication links to prioritize. It's all about gaining that edge.
It really highlights that sometimes you don't need brute force, right?
Exactly.
It's about that, that smart play, that strategic positioning, that information superiority that really makes a difference.
Yeah.
Okay, now what about economy of force? I would imagine, considering that every single launch is incredibly expensive and complex, that's a really big deal in space.
Oh, absolutely. Every satellite, every single piece of equipment we send up there, significant investment. So economy of force in terms of space. It's about being smart, being resourceful. It's about getting the absolute most out of what we've got.
So really prioritizing those missions, making those tough calls about what we can do and what we can't do with what we've got.
Exactly. Maximizing every satellite, every sensor, even every line of code, right? It means we need to design more versatile spacecraft, come up with like totally new ways of operating, and all while being mindful of those limitations we talked about.
Makes sense. Okay, so on to restraint. And, in a place like space, where everything you do can have these, these lasting impacts, that seems especially important.
Oh, it's absolutely crucial. Think about it. What we do in space today, it could have consequences for decades, centuries even. And the perfect example, space debris.
Right.
We're talking about all those dead satellites, those used rocket stages, even tiny little fragments from collisions, all just whizzing around up there at crazy speeds.
Yeah, like a cosmic junkyard.
Exactly. And, even a tiny piece of that debris, if it hits the wrong part of a satellite, well, it could be catastrophic.
For sure.
And we've seen firsthand how irresponsible actions can just make this problem a million times worse. Those Chinese and Russian anti-satellite tests created these massive clouds of debris that'll be a hazard for generations.
Wow. So restraint, then, it means thinking long-term, understanding what those actions, what we do, what that could lead to, and not making it even worse for everybody.
We got it.
Yeah.
It's about acting responsibly, not just for ourselves, but for every other spacefaring nation out there, now and in the future.
It's like that old saying, leave it better than you found it, but on like a cosmic scale.
I like that.
All right, so we've got these joint operation principles, right?
Yeah.
And now we're applying them to space. But there's another key aspect of SCP-30, and that's the human element. This document, it really pushes the importance of allies and partners.
Absolutely. And that's something that every Guardian should, really take to heart, because in this day and age, space security, it's a team effort. We can't do it on our own.
And we're not just talking about, like, traditional military allies, are we?
No, not at all. We're talking about everyone, those commercial space companies, international organizations, even academic institutions. Because the challenges we face in space are just so, complex, so intertwined that it's going to take a real global effort to overcome them.
Okay, so we've gone from how we got here,
Yeah.
the whole history of military space operations, all the way to those big ideas about working together on an international scale.
Yep.
But let's bring it back down to Earth for a sec.
Oh, right.
Or, well, maybe not, since we're talking about space. Guardian, what does all this actually mean for you specifically?
It means that you're not just, some person operating technology.
Wow.
You are a vital part of space power. It's not enough to just, follow orders. It's about knowing the why behind everything you do.
Because when you understand the why, it's like, you've leveled up.
Exactly.
It's that difference between just, going through the motions and really owning your role in the Space Force.
That's a great way to put it. And that's where SCP-30, it goes beyond just being, a set of rules. It's pushing for a certain mindset.
Yep.
It's a way of thinking about all those challenges, all those opportunities in an environment that never sits still, that's always changing.
Okay, so if we had to sum it up, what are the big things that make up that Guardian mindset?
First and foremost, adaptability. Space is not static. New threats are always popping up. Tech is changing faster than ever. And geopolitics.
Oh, don't even get me started.
Right. That's a whole other beast. Guardians, they got to be able to roll with the punches, to get creative, come up with new solutions on the fly.
So you can't just, like, memorize the procedures. You got to be able to think for yourself when they just don't cut it anymore.
And SCP-30, it talks about being that thinking warrior.
Okay.
It's about connecting those dots, seeing how your piece fits into the whole puzzle, understanding that even the little decisions, those can have big consequences down the line.
And doing all that, by the way, under pressure.
Oh, yeah.
In situations where, let's face it, you never really know what's going to happen next.
You got to be ready for anything. And space, it's demanding. Physically, mentally, you name it. It can be isolating. The stakes are through the roof, and there's very little room for error.
So we're talking about, like, keeping your cool when things get dicey, having each other's backs as a team, and never, ever giving up on the mission, even when things get rough.
Right.
And they will get rough.
It's that resilience, that commitment to the mission, that's what really makes a Guardian. It's what allows you to succeed even in the vastness of space.
Okay, Guardian, we've covered a ton of ground today.
We sure have.
I mean, we went from that historical context, broke down those key principles of SCP-30, and even talked about what it means to really embody that Guardian mindset. But as with any deep dive worth its salt, we want to leave you with something to,
something to chew on.
Exactly,
Yeah.
to chew on. We've talked about how important it's becoming to cooperate in space, to work with others. So how do you see that playing out down the road, especially with everything going on back here on Earth?
Yeah.
What opportunities and what challenges do you see when it comes to actually building those partnerships in space.
Yeah.
It's something worth thinking about because the future of space, well, it's not set in stone.
Not at all.
It's going to be shaped by the people on the front lines, by guardians like you. So keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and keep pushing those boundaries. Until next time, Guardian, stay safe, stay sharp, and keep reaching for the stars.